Hello, my name is Benjamin Hart. I'm an American attorney and the managing director of Integrity Legal here in Bangkok, Thailand. As the title of this video suggests, we're first of all talking about this is business news. It's going to pertain to cannabis, but understand, I think this has tremendous overarching ramifications for investor sentiment, or especially foreign investor sentiment, likely in the future with regard to Thailand, and just generally the overall business environment, including the real estate sector. This is going to have tremendous ramifications, in my opinion. Regarding the title, where government is in quotation marks, I'm using that term because, look, as clearly you can see from this channel, I've got real issues with the current prime minister based on her conduct regarding, talking to the de facto leader, if you want to call him that, of Cambodia. I've gotten into that in other videos. I'm not going to get into that much further over here, but there's been a lot, and I've discussed some of this in a prior video as well, where currently they're saying, oh, there's still the votes in the coalition government to prop her up, whatever. Yeah, well, as we discussed in one video specifically, there's the executive boards of these parties have said, yeah, we're behind this. But even in one video, they said it was considered a consensus, which, what does that mean? And we're in this kind of lull period right now where Parliament is adjourned. So we don't exactly know the status of the current government, is what I'm trying to say. It'll be interesting to see whether the rank and file of these parties are going to be completely lockstep behind a lot of these initiatives and behind her, behind this new coalition. One of the major coalition parties pulled out. Again, we just don't really, we're in a kind of a fluid situation here. We don't really know what's going on. So I have a hard time viewing this current rump coalition, if you want to call it that, as, fully solid. I think time's going to tell. Probably next week we're going to have a good idea what this is really looking like. So that's the reason for putting that in quotes. That said, I thought of making this video after reading a recent article from the Bangkok Post. BangkokPost.com. Article is titled, Thai Cannabis Stores Fear for Their Future. Move by the government to recriminalize cannabis is shaking up billion-dollar industry. Quoting directly, tourism operators expect many cannabis stores across Thailand to be shuttered, especially in urban areas, leaving only those that supply the herb for medical purposes as the government moves to recriminalize the plant. The Ministry of Public Health issued an order late on Tuesday prohibiting the sale of cannabis for recreational use. Yeah, that's one that just has been bugging me forever. I've discussed this in other videos. Where's all the concern for recreational use alcohol? We got alcohol all over the place. Oh, but recreational use cannabis. Meanwhile, as discussed, where do they get the power to just unilaterally say that a plant is now criminalized? As I've discussed in other videos, this was pulled off of the narcotics list. It's my understanding you need an act of parliament to do this stuff. This is as arbitrary and capricious as saying, oh, florists can no longer sell tulips because we view them as narcotics. And I know that sounds kind of outlandish or absurdist, but it's not. It really isn't. I mean, if they can just say, oh, well, because we say so, this is now a narcotic, what else could they just, because we say so, say is a narcotic? Quoting further, and making it mandatory for all retail purchase to require a doctor's prescription. Well, again, make a law. And it was my understanding some year and a half ago when they tried to do this, everybody agreed, yeah, we'll put it through Parliament. Well, what are you doing? Put it through Parliament. You've had time. So, or, oh, we just want to do it because we say so. It's really ridiculous from that perspective. Meanwhile, quoting further, the new rules will come into effect once they are published in the Royal Gazette, which could happen within days. It may not happen at all. We don't know. Now, again, these quote-unquote rules could still be legally challenged. I discussed that in a prior video. Now, the Royal Gazette, for those in an American context, that's kind of the equivalent. I mean, it's not the equivalent exactly, but it's kind of analogous to what we would call the Federal Register back in the United States. That's where laws are effectively, the country is officially put on notice that a law has been promulgated, if you will. So, yeah, once it goes if it goes through the Royal Gazette, which might not be a foregone conclusion, if it does, yeah, okay, presumptively, then they may change enforcement policies, etc. But that stuff can still be challenged, and I expect a lot of it will be, because as we'll get to here in a moment, 18,000 places have been doing business legally, and then overnight, because one person said so, it's all going to change. Because this one minister of public health has now said, well, because I think so, it's now a narcotic, and therefore all these businesses who've detrimentally relied on the public policies and the laws and the rules here in Thailand and have done things legally are suddenly going to be outlaws. Quoting further, and this is from Khalsad English, that's khalsadenglish.com, Thailand tightens cannabis control as 18,000 shops must adapt. And under the subheading, massive industry impact, quote, more than 18,000 licensed cannabis shops across Thailand will need to overhaul their business practices under the new rules. You know, and again, rules apropos of what? Based on what? As I've discussed in other videos, and again, I guess I'm a layman when it comes to Thai law, but Thai law is civil law. It's based on the notion of the doctrine of codification. You have to codify through Parliament, presumably, something you want to make illegal. You know, it was delisted. It became legal. You want to re-illegalize it, put it through Parliament. You know, you can't just say, in my mind, how can you just say, oh, all these 18,000 businesses are now just illegal because we say so? And beyond even that, let's really take a look at this, and this is why I'm titling this Thailand Business News, and it's not specifically about cannabis per se. The world is watching, okay? And I'm talking now, Thailand, please hear me. You know, people in a public policy position, please hear me. If Thailand shutters 18,000 businesses that from one day to the next went from being legal to illegal on the whim of one public servant, basically, how is that going to look? What is that going to do to future investor confidence over here? I can't think of anything that looks more arbitrary and capricious than this. And especially for people who invested over here in things. Now, if it's put through Parliament and there's been a debate and people have talked about it and they modify what they're going to do, you know, I think, you know, investors and things look at that, you know, down the line. And again, I'm not just talking about investors in the cannabis space. Investors across the board are going to be looking at this going, hey, is this a place we want to invest? You know, we may not be in cannabis, but maybe we're in medical clinics, you know, that have nothing to do with cannabis. From one day to the next, could they just say whatever it is we're doing is now illegal? You know, or what if, you know, what if we want to come in and do microbrewing with alcohol? And they're looking over at cannabis and they're saying, well, from one second to the next, it just became illegal. What if they say microbrewing is just 1 second to the next illegal? I know they've been talking about doing that. You know, or, you know, now, and they're also pushing this, or at least sections of the coalition are pushing this casino bill. You know, if you're an investor, even a massive corporate investor in a casino here in Thailand, you look at this and you say, you know, do we really want to put $1 billion into Thailand to invest in casinos, which is already controversial, when, you know, from 1 second to the next, they could just say, no, it's not legal anymore. Sorry, thanks for the investment, but your casino floor is shut down. You know, I don't think this is a great policy. I don't think it's being implemented with any foresight or prudence. And, you know, I don't think this is just going to have ramifications within the cannabis space. Meanwhile, in I think the Bangkok Post article I just cited, which I urge those who are watching this video, go check that out. They go into the fact that, oh, well, you know, and they talk about all this, oh, it's a nuisance. People smoke outside and people don't, you know, Thais don't like it. So some Thais have complained. Fine. We have nuisance laws on that. I made videos about this years ago about, you know, the Thai police said, hey, if you're smoking outside, we're going to arrest you for nuisance. Start enforcing that. That's already on the books. You know, stop using that stuff as a pretext to do this because, look, at the end of the day, this really is an arbitrary and capricious move. I think it's going to have tremendous negative blowback in the especially foreign investment community. The world's watching, and this doesn't look great.